In 1941, American leaders faced a harrowing calculation. To defeat Nazi Germany, they would abandon decades of hostility and arm Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union, the very regime they called their ideological enemy. Hitler's armies swept across Russia as entire cities burned, with up to 80% of German divisions locked in a war of annihilation on the Eastern Front. 30 million lives hung in the balance, and Roosevelt's government chose ruthless pragmatism over principle, unleashing hundreds of thousands of trucks, tanks, and bombs through Lend-Lease. Why did the world's beacon of democracy fight beside a dictatorship, and what lasting scars did this alliance leave on history? The answer begins in the darkest days of World War II, when survival eclipsed every conviction. Washington and Moscow spent 2 decades regarding each other with suspicion and contempt. The United States refused to recognize the Soviet regime until 1933, long after most European powers had re-established ties. In the years that followed, memories of American troops fighting Bolsheviks in the Russian Civil War lingered on both sides. Stalin's Great Purge from 1936 to 1938, with its show trials and mass executions, filled Western newspapers with images of terror and repression. To American eyes, the Soviet Union looked like a closed, unpredictable dictatorship bent on exporting revolution. In Moscow, American capitalism represented a hostile world bent on encirclement and sabotage. When Stalin signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Hitler on August 23, 1939, dividing Eastern Europe into Nazi and Soviet spheres, Western trust collapsed entirely. For many in Washington, the pact confirmed every fear about Soviet cynicism and expansion. A chasm separated Roosevelt's America, built on free elections, private property, and open markets, from Stalin's one-party state, where dissent meant exile or death. Each side saw the other as a mortal threat to its way of life. But on June 22, 1941, Hitler's armies stormed across the Soviet border. Operation Barbarossa unleashed the largest invasion in history, with 3 million Axis troops advancing along a front nearly 2,000 miles wide. Overnight, the Soviet Union became the only force tying down the bulk of the German military. Roosevelt faced a hard calculation. Without Soviet resistance, Germany could dominate Eurasia and threaten the security of the entire world. As historian Richard Overy writes, the alliance that emerged after June 1941 was never based on shared values. The Western democracies regarded Soviet communism with deep suspicion, and Stalin saw capitalist powers as potential enemies. But Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union transformed these ideological adversaries into partners of necessity. The sheer scale of the Eastern Front and the Red Army's sacrifices made cooperation with Moscow indispensable to defeating Nazi Germany. Roosevelt and Stalin remained ideological opposites, but survival now demanded that principle give way to partnership, however uneasy, however temporary. German divisions poured into the Soviet Union with a fury never seen before. By 1942, as many as 4 out of every 5 German soldiers were fighting on the Eastern Front. The numbers dwarf anything in the West. The Red Army faced not just the Wehrmacht, but also Axis allies, Romanians, Hungarians, and Italians, stretched across a front from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea. Battles like Stalingrad and Kursk each involved millions of troops, tens of thousands of tanks and aircraft, and artillery barrages that lasted for days. The Soviet Union became the main battlefield of the entire war. The cost was staggering. Modern research estimates Soviet war deaths between 24 and 27 million, nearly 1 in every 8 Soviet citizens. Of these, at least 8 million were soldiers. The rest were civilians lost to occupation, siege, and mass executions. By comparison, American war deaths stood at about 405,000. The scale of destruction in the Soviet Union, entire cities leveled, villages erased, Populations uprooted had no parallel in the West. For United States and British planners, these losses were not distant statistics. The Red Army was absorbing and destroying the bulk of Hitler's ground forces, preventing them from turning westward. Any collapse in the east would have freed up hundreds of German divisions to reinforce France, Italy, or even threaten the Middle East. Every day the Soviets held out, the Allies gained time to prepare, to arm, and to plan their own counterstrikes. The Eastern Front was not just another theatre, it was the crucible where Nazi Germany's fate was decided. Without the Soviet Union's sacrifice, the Allied path to victory would have been longer, bloodier, and far less certain. Franklin Roosevelt faced a dilemma that stretched far beyond ideology. The German war machine was devouring the Soviet Union, and every day the Red Army held out meant fewer German troops available to threaten Britain or the United States. Roosevelt's answer was a policy known as Germany First, prioritizing the defeat of Hitler over all other goals, even if that meant aiding Stalin's regime. The legal instrument was already in place. On March 11, 1941, Roosevelt signed the Lend-Lease Act, granting him authority to send arms and supplies to any country whose defense he deemed vital to American security. The law was written with Britain in mind, but after Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union, Roosevelt quietly declared the Soviet Union eligible for aid. To judge Soviet resolve and needs firsthand, Roosevelt dispatched his closest advisor, Harry Hopkins, to Moscow in July 1941. Hopkins met with Stalin in the Kremlin, listening as the Soviet leader asked urgently for aircraft, tanks, trucks, and aluminum. Hopkins reported back that the Soviets would keep fighting if they received material support. His cables and notes described Stalin as calm, realistic, and determined, not the fanatical ideologue many in Washington imagined. Hopkins's personal conviction, shaped by those meetings, became Roosevelt's argument to his cabinet and to Congress. Supporting the Soviet Union was not about liking communism, but about stopping Hitler. Within months, the first shipments of American aid began moving east. Trucks, jeeps, aircraft, tanks, locomotives, rails, food, aluminum, machine tools, and radio equipment. These supplies traveled by sea and overland routes, often at great risk, forming the backbone of what would become a massive logistical operation. Lend-Lease did not erase suspicion or erase the moral gulf between Washington and Moscow, but it transformed the relationship from wary distance to practical cooperation, driven by the logic that survival demanded action, not agreement. By the end of 1941, the machinery of alliance was in motion, and the United States was committed to keeping the Soviet Union in the fight, no matter the political cost at home. Three main arteries carried American and British supplies into the Soviet Union: the Arctic convoys to Murmansk and Archangel, the Persian corridor through Iran, and the Far Eastern route to Vladivostok. Each route carried its own dangers, but none matched the terror of the Arctic convoys. Ships left Iceland in tight formation, braving storms, ice, and the near-constant threat of German U-boats and bombers. In the summer of 1942, convoy PQ-17 set out with 35 merchant ships loaded with tanks, trucks, and ammunition. On July 4th, the order came to scatter, fearing attack by the battleship Tirpitz. Isolated and unprotected, 24 ships were sunk in the following days, their cargo and crews lost to the freezing sea. A British sailor later recalled that they watched the ships burn on the horizon, knowing they could do nothing. The water was so cold you could barely last a minute. The Persian corridor offered no such drama, but demanded endurance. American trucks and locomotives rolled off ships in Basra, crossed the Iranian desert, and snaked north by rail and road, feeding the Red Army's advance. Through every route, the supplies that began as policy in Washington became lifelines, delivered under fire, paid for in sweat and blood. Trust remained scarce even as cooperation deepened. British and American intelligence agencies, holding the keys to the ultra-decrypts, filtered every detail before passing anything to Moscow. Stalin's generals received warnings about German troop movements, but they never learned the true source. Enigma's secrets stayed locked away. Each side weighed what to share, always conscious that today's ally might be tomorrow's rival. Diplomacy at the highest level carried the same tension. In late November 1943, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin gathered in Tehran. The conference set the date for the Normandy landings and promised a coordinated assault on Germany. Yet behind the handshakes, suspicion lingered. Stalin pressed hard for a second front, doubting Western resolve. Roosevelt maneuvered to keep channels open, even as Churchill worried about the fate of Eastern Europe. Moral compromise shadowed these negotiations. When German forces uncovered mass graves of Polish officers in Katyn Forest in April 1943, evidence pointed to Soviet guilt. Both Washington and London quietly suppressed their own intelligence, refusing to confront Stalin while the alliance held. In private, diplomats acknowledged the truth. In public, they let silence shield the coalition. Such bargains, intelligence guarded, crimes unspoken, became the price of holding the alliance together through the war's final offensives. June 6, 1944, Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, opening a Western front that finally matched the scale of Soviet offensives in the east. That same month, the Red Army launched Operation Bagration, a massive assault that shattered Germany's army group center and drove deep into Belarus. The assault on two fronts left Hitler's forces reeling, pressed from both directions by armies that had little in common beyond the shared goal of Germany's defeat. By May 1945, Berlin lay in ruins and the Nazi regime was finished. Yet even as the guns fell silent, the alliance began to fracture. Disputes erupted over the occupation of Germany and the fate of Eastern Europe. American and British officials worried about Soviet intentions in Poland and the Balkans, while Stalin demanded security guarantees and influence over neighboring states. Behind closed doors, atomic secrets were guarded tightly. The United States had excluded the Soviets from the Manhattan Project, fueling suspicion that would soon harden into rivalry. The victory over Nazi Germany, achieved through coordinated pressure and sacrifice, became the final act of cooperation before the world split once more, this time not in battle, but in an uneasy peace shadowed by distrust. Geopolitical necessity still forces unlikely partnerships, just as it did in 1941, when survival outweighed ideology. The uneasy alliance remade the world, but its shadow endures in every tense summit and fragile truce today. In great crises, who we trust can shape history for generations. What choices would we make now?